Welcome to SPAN. My name is Mark Davis, and I am honored to be this year's president of SPAN. I am on the Seattle Trust team for the Davidson Trust Company, and really thrilled everyone is here today. We have 40 people that have not been to SPAN before. 40 people, and you all get to be recognized at this moment. So please stand up if you have not been to SPAN before, and we'll give you a big round of applause. And we very much hope you come back on December 8th when we have Renee and Carl Benke speaking to us, and leading that discussion will be our SPAN sponsor from Goldman Sachs, Aya Hamilton. So we want to be sure you guys get that on your calendars. For those of you who have not been to SPAN before, we sort of have a different sequence than most luncheons. We actually serve lunch after the conversation. So you can enjoy your salads and your rolls during the conversation, and then we serve lunch during the table talk. And the table talk sort of goes like this. Every table has a captain. So raise your hand if you're a captain. I want to be sure we have okay, it's looking good. It's looking good. Okay, I think we're covered. And of course, during the table talk, you guys aren't supposed to be talking yet. During the table talk, we talk about what we learned. Maggie will have some amazing things to say about not only her personal philanthropy, but also how she works with advisors and how she became the Gates Award volunteer this year for that award last Friday. And I want to have a special applause for you, Maggie, for winning that award. And as we know, SPAN would not exist without our sponsors. For those of you that would like to be a sponsor in 2017, the door is open. So hold your applause, please, until I recognize all our sponsors this year. Without our sponsors, we would not have this organization. Clark Newber, D.A. Davidson Trust Company, Del Prado Philanthropy, Filament, Goldman Sachs, Helsel Fetterman, Laird Norton Wealth Management, Morgan Stanley, Pacific Continental Bank, Pratt Legacy Advisors, Seattle Children's Hospital, Seattle Foundation, Social Venture Partners, the Private Client Reserve of U.S. Bank, new sponsor of ours this month, Wellspring CPAs, and Whittier Trust Company. So please give a warm round of applause for all our sponsors. So we're getting on with our conversation. Please join me in welcoming Paul Shoemaker, founding partner of Social Venture Partners, and no, Paul, you're on the wrong side. You need to sit on that side. I've been told by the AV crew that it's Maggie on this side and Paul. Feel free, Maggie, to come up. Author of bestseller book called Can't Not Do, and if you want to know what that means, be sure to ask him. He's got a very succinct way of explaining it, and it's really important, the things we can't not do. And he will not only lead the discussion today, but he will also introduce Maggie. So welcome Maggie Walker to SPAN.
So great to see everybody. How are you?
I'm wonderful.
Good to see you. Maggie truly does not need a heck of a lot of introduction. Anybody that's been in this community knows how many places her impact has shown up and how many causes she is a part of. And I want to talk to her about some of that today, but there are a few people in this community legitimately that can say they care more about the Pacific Northwest than Maggie Walker does. So thanks for all you do. So let's start with sort of the basics. If I asked you sort of what's the focus of your giving and why have you sort of decided to take that pathway, what would you say?
That's always a hard question to answer. There are things that I'm interested in personally, and they tend to be fairly broad. And then I was married to Doug, who had his set of interests, and there was intersection, but there was also things that I was deeply interested in that he was not as interested in. So it made for a really broad set of issues and organizations that we were involved in. And Doug had success early in life, and I was also quite young. And you kind of make a decision. There's a decision point where you say, you know, we've been incredibly fortunate. What do I want to do with the rest of my life? And you can either choose a career and move forward with that. And this happened coincidentally with the birth of my daughter. And I had gone back and gotten another degree at UW, intending to change my career, and instead got pregnant. And so I am a high energy person, and I realized that I shouldn't be spending all my time with my child, because I would probably try to run my child's life, since I like to run things. And so I deliberately kind of tried to chart a path that kept me intellectually stimulated and busy, but also connected to her in a really robust way. And so what I discovered in that time is that I loved being a nonprofit board member. Go figure, right? God created Maggie to be a nonprofit board member.
Yeah, that's good. So you gave me a great segue to the board member thing. So over the course of my time with SVP, sort of whatever quota I think I could sort of Maggie could stand to have me send her way. Anybody that's sort of new to boards or want to learn about how to be a great board member, swear to God, number one person I would send her to is him or her to is Maggie. So you just said, like, you know, God birthed you to be a nonprofit board member. Not everybody would necessarily either say that or lay claim to that. Or want it, correct. So there's a couple parts of this. So number one, like, why? About
I'm actually not exactly sure why, but part of it is the way I was raised. My father and mother were people who did volunteer work. My dad retired in his early 60s and started tutoring prisoners and GED, and that's what he spent the next 15, 20 years of his life doing. He demonstrated against the Vietnam War when I was in college, not demonstrating against the Vietnam War. And he was a very active and deeply religious person. And I went to Catholic schools, and I think an awful lot of us recovering Catholics populate the nonprofit sector, because guilt plays an enormous part of our training. And so when we reach these moments, we go, oh Lord, I gotta pay back. And in a way, that's a beautiful thing. But it's a combination, I think, of that, and also landing in Seattle when all this fortune happened, where Seattle was this small, big town sitting on the edge of what it was going to become. And, you know, that's really exciting to be in a place where you feel like you can actually be part of something. And that was the situation. So
let me drill you one step further.
Yeah, keep going.
Why the board thing, right? You could have, you do lots of other things.
Right.
You could have, why the board thing?
So for me, the board role combines all of the skill sets that I had deliberately cultivated and had been cultivated in me by my education and my background. And so I have a history degree, I have a journalism degree. I worked in the commercial furnishings and design field, and I deliberately did that because I wanted to force myself as an introvert to be able to go out and call on people cold and be able to walk into anybody's office, anywhere, anytime, and actually have a conversation with them and try to sell them something. And you know, that's actually was my motivation, believe it or not. And one day I woke up in Grand Rapids, Michigan in a hotel room, because I represented a lot of furniture factories, and I asked myself, do I really want to do this anymore? And the answer was, no, actually I don't. I think I know how to do this, and I'm not motivated by money, so let's move on. And interestingly enough, I was provided with an opportunity with the Henry and Seattle Children's Home, where I was recruited to both those boards just after Keno was born. And I started doing them, and I thought, this is, it requires communication skills, it requires analytical skills, it requires the ability to talk to anyone about anything, and it also requires you to ask for the order if you're actually doing your fundraising job as a nonprofit board member. So I had, this bizarre set of skills that dovetailed, and, I like working with groups of people, which is the other odd behavior, I think that.
Great fit. So over all those years, and y'all in this room are either on or been around nonprofit boards or for-profit boards, and a lot of them are not so hot. What to you makes a great board or a great board member?
Wow. Let's see, a great board. A great board is usually an interesting mix of people. People who have different points of view and who respect each other, and that there is a dynamic of energy and an understanding of what their role is. Yep. And depending on the size, scale, evolutionary place of the nonprofit, that role is actually different. So it's a tough thing, but board members have to be willing to surrender a little bit of their ego, because it isn't about them, it's about the organization ultimately, and it's about a group of people making something really cool happen. And when you get a group of people who all pull together, it's like the boys in the boat. You feel the swing, right? It is amazing that you can accomplish stuff. So that to me is the beauty, because it's so different with every possible permutation. It's like, what is it Tolstoy said? Every happy family is the same, and every unhappy family is unhappy in their own way. Right. And so it's a little like that.
Just to catch us up, what boards are you on right now?
Oh, Lord.
Let's see if you can do this.
Yeah, let's see if we can do this. Try not to offend anybody in the room. Right now, I'm chair of the board of the Friends of the Waterfront Seattle, which is the nonprofit created to steward the waterfront redevelopment project. I'm also chair of the board of Global Partnerships, which is an international poverty alleviation impact investor. I'm chair of the advisory board of the College of the Environment at the University of Washington, and co-chair of its campaign with Martha Konsgaard. I am still past president of the board of the Seattle Art Museum because my successor has not wanted to quit the job, so I'm still there as past president and enjoying it, because I can speak my mind without having responsibility for any of the outcome. Let's see, I am...
Is it like a former past president?
Yeah, former past president, right. Let's see, I know there's some others. I am the incoming board chair of National Audubon, whose offices are in New York City. And I think I'm leaving somebody out. That's what I worry about. I have to always look at my calendar and remind myself, oh, yes.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's good enough.
Yeah, good.
So when you and I had lunch a couple months ago to talk about this, one of the things that came up was this idea, not new, the philanthropy is about more than just money.
Right.
And I feel like you feel that pretty strongly. Just say a little bit about where that came from and what does that mean to you, and in terms of how you do your philanthropy in the community.
Well, it was pretty obvious early on when I became active that there were different kinds of folks who were involved in philanthropy, and there are people who used their influence, their work, their time, whatever, for the ability to bring things forward for a nonprofit. There are also people who made huge investments as well, or there were people who did both, or there were people who gave to the extent of their ability while doing both. But it was clear that impact is not limited to money. I mean, and particularly in the nonprofit sector, it's We measure our impact not by money, and it's one of the things that actually is sometimes hard to manage in that sector is how do we measure whether we're good at something? And it isn't money ultimately that provides the final accounting, so to speak. What I learned is that it's important to invest in the things you really care about. But Doug and I had a lot of different things that we were interested in, and we used to fight about, where the money was going to go. And so, you don't want to chop up the child too small, but it's a demonstration, and people I think used to find us a little hard to understand because we did invest in so many things. And as we got older, we got more comfortable with making very large investments or bets, because our child had reached majority and she was in a position to take care of herself. And, I think that's natural. And then, frankly, when Doug passed away this year, I've been thinking, gosh, how am I going to do this now? Because life can be kind of funny about when it decides that your time is done. And if you have left a lot of stuff kind of on the back burner and haven't moved forward with it, you haven't done what you can do. And so part of what I'm committed to at this point is really seeing some things that I care about, make them happen now as much as I can. So, I think the attitude towards money is all about sort of putting it behind what you care about. And it's been my experience when asking people for money, what they respond to is if we can ask them for the thing that matters to them, then of course they're going to give, and we give them an opportunity to do that. But what's the point of pushing someone to give to something they don't care about? So this is one of the tricks of what I consider to be really good fundraising, is understanding who out there really cares about what you do and inviting people into that process. And it's a positive thing. This is not a confrontational behavior or activity. This is about betting on the things that you think really matter. So, does that answer the question?
That was great. Thank you very much. I didn't think of this earlier. Have you involved your daughter Keena in your philanthropy at all, or not? Or
Yes, she is actually now a fundraiser. That's what she does as a profession. So
how'd that happen?
So she grew up watching us, because we did a lot of events at our home. We bought this big house, and we said, what are we going to do with this house? And we said, well, it's an important thing for us to share this with the community. And so I think we used to have 20 events a year at our home. And so she grew up living in a house that was constantly full of people that we were trying to engage in our work. And for her, it feels completely natural. The part for her has been understanding what she will have to do as she gets older. And so that's been something that I've left to her choice. She's involved in the foundation. She's made a couple of gifts, has chosen to make a couple of gifts on her own. And that's what I would like her to do, is to continue to grow into that role, but in a comfortable way and not feel like it's a burden. And I don't want to leave her a burden behind. Some people who inherit a big foundation or a big responsibility find it a burden. And so it's understanding where she is going to be comfortable. But she's committed to the nonprofit sector. She understands, and she's very, very good at what she does. So that's just a little advertisement in case you are interested in a great major gifts officer in the future.
I've seen her pitch once or twice. She is great. I'm going to give the group here a chance to ask questions here in just a second. So we're obviously sitting here in front of a whole bunch of financial advisors, wealth managers.
Right.
So, and you've had more than one conversation over the year with yours that involve philanthropy. What would you sort of say to financial advisors? What parts of the conversation about philanthropy have sort of worked, not worked? What advice would you give them when they're talking to other clients about this?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've evolved a lot over the last 25 years. And what I would encourage financial advisors to do today is to remain current, because the field is shifting very rapidly. And even the IRS, I think, is actually starting to think about this 5% rule stuff. So the way we invest as individuals who are fortunate enough to have significant assets, it needs to reflect our values. And I think the conversation between the person who is investing and the person who is doing the investing needs to actually tackle that, particularly in this community, which I think has a fairly good conscience about this. I chair the board of global partnerships. We actually invest in third world countries, and we earn a very nice return, and we return our capital to our investors, but we have huge impact on poverty. And if you do your investing right, there are ways, and that market needs to be grown, and the way it is grown is by demand. And the demand is starting to really be there. And so I would love to see us as a capitalist country where people have lost faith in most of our institutions and have lost faith somewhat in capitalism, frankly. We live in a city where capitalism is under attack. We need to rescue it. We need to make it something, a force for good. And I think the way we do that as wealthy individuals or as foundations is to invest our money differently. And to actually push that out, because unfortunately we do live in a world where money matters. Capital matters. It's how people get places, and we just need to make sure it flows into places that gives everybody an opportunity, because we all have benefited from opportunities, even though we can pat ourselves on the back and say we're self-made. If we weren't born in this place at this time, this wouldn't have happened. If we're born in West Africa, where there's revolution and all kinds of things happening, this wouldn't be who we were. So, you have to thank God about that, but you also have to pay it back. You have to pay it back, and you have to pay it forward, which is what we try to do. So.
So do a few folks out there have a question or two they would like to ask Maggie? If you do, we got a microphone.
Because we are filming, so when you
Yeah.
ask a question, you want to make sure the question.
Don't be shy.
About working with lawyers?
Well, oh, lawyers. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. No, some of my best friends are lawyers. So.
Be careful.
Yeah, be careful, right?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So come on, who's got a question? A tough one. Renee.
The conversation often comes up when you were talking about poverty and sending money outside of our community.
Right.
How do you make the choice when you look at the poverty that we're seeing with the homelessness and all the other issues? How do you make the choice to take that money and send it away from our own community? And I think that's one of the things I find our contemporaries questioning themselves and questioning others about.
Well, this doesn't necessarily leave this room, although you're filming it, unfortunately.
We can edit.
I like to invest in things that I think are going to work. And and we're spending a whole lot of money in this town on homelessness, and there's no impact. And I think that's not a question of money. I think it's a question of how it's organized and structure and outcomes being measured. And, I think there's a whole set of issues. We have the capacity in this community to do a lot of good for a lot of people already, and I think we just need to manage it and direct it. And, not in an well, yeah. Thank God that I wasn't appointed. It's a really hard problem, and I don't feel like don't misunderstand, I don't think I have the answer to it. I just personally like to invest in things that I know, or at least I have some influence or understanding on the belly of the beast that I'm investing in, so I can see what's happening and feel like there's ways to have impact that make sense, that are a proper return on investment. And I would urge all of you who do invest in these nonprofits who are serving, it's not that they're not serving them well. The question we have to ask ourselves is, how are we effective? It's, what are we trying to drive here? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And I don't think we have a grasp on that because we haven't asked ourselves a bunch of hard questions. So one of the things that great board members do is they ask really hard questions. And that's a hard question. It's a good question. But I just found Global Partners has been a donor for many, many, many years. And then I got inside of it and I realized their investment, the return on their investment for a dollar in the third world is so great. And I've been on the ground, I've been in farmers, their fields, I've been in their medical clinics, I've gone out, I've done all kinds of work, and these people, they work their butts off, and for a little bit of capital, we can change their lives. And to me, that's a really compelling argument. And so, that's just my point of view.
Was your first connection to giving outside the U.S., was it more about your passion or more about something that worked and you saw the ROI, or?
Well, for me, it was experimental. I mean, I do this occasionally, not occasionally, a lot. If somebody I know is really passionate about something, they come to me and they say, this is a really cool thing, Maggie, you need to get, you need to contribute to this. I'll say, sure, I'll try it. And then, you gradually figure out where, and then, they try to nail you. I mean, they try to, let's be honest about this. And so if you're, this is where the piece comes in, that the nonprofit sector needs to be able to tell its story a lot better. And the people who are really good at telling their story and talking about their impact are going to win because they're much better at talking about it to us who have the capacity to support them. So that's another hard question is, where is that infrastructure? How do we provide that to the sector? Communications are really important in our culture. And I think the nonprofit sector is falling further and further behind on how to communicate effectively. So, and I actually think this whole issue of homelessness is wrapped around some of the things that we don't do well as a nonprofit sector. So I'd like to see that, I'd love to see it benefited. But, it's the same thing. I don't know how you feel when you walk down the street and people ask you for money. You kind of say to yourself, what do I do here? They say, do you have spare change? Do you have $1? And it's a really interesting question for us all. What do you do? I mean, did you start handing out money to everybody who asked you, or how do you make that decision? And, I've struggled with that for years. So, I don't know what the answer is. So,
I do too.
Yeah.
Somebody over there?
Maggie, I'm George Twiss with PRCN Foundation, and we are heavily involved in the tsunami of seniors, the silver tsunami, the 75 million coming down. Yeah. And frankly, whether it's the federal government, whether it's United Way, that's the forgotten area. And we see that as we try to transform that perception of age as not somebody to go warehouse. We see it, I'm there now, I've served on the board of Sound Generations, and trying to get attention to that as a cause is extremely difficult. It's not the flavor of the day or the interesting. I don't know what you think about how we would serve the need of the older generation.
Boy, that's a complicated one, especially since I'm almost part of it. I think it's, again, a way of framing and presenting what the issues are, because there's no clarity around that, just as I don't think there's a lot of clarity around homelessness. So these big problems require sort of the ability to think of them clearly and strategically and to really focus perhaps on one thing at a time and try to figure out how are we going to do this, then how are we going to do this, and then how are we going to do this. Because otherwise, people just sort of think of it as a black hole. What do I do here? That's what I meant about walking down the street and looking at the hundreds of nonprofits who are serving the homeless. Who do I support? How do I know? It's a very complicated process.
Yep. What else we got? Maureen.
Hi. So there is this wonderful trend happening in the U.S. with large philanthropists and foundations coalescing their resources and their strategies to make an impact on specific problems having to do with social inequity. And I was wondering if you're seeing the same trend here, or starting here in Seattle, and if that's reflected in your board experience of nonprofit organizations coalescing. Because there are these very, very large problems like homelessness that can't seem to be addressed by one nonprofit alone. So what do you see there in us harnessing really the strengths of different nonprofits and through their leadership to actually address these problems?
So Seattle's a little bit, I mean, I'm speaking to the choir here, I assume. You probably know this better than I do, but it's always seemed to me that Seattle, because of its culture, natural culture, as Leonard and I discovered when we were trying to do Mohi, Seattle tends to reinvent itself every 20 or 30 years. And the reason it does that is because it's always been a bastion of individuals, and some of them pretty eccentric, right? This is a very individualistic place. And it doesn't have a lot of old foundations, the way, Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, some of the big, and even Packard and Hewlett are moving in much more institutional ways now because of who manages them. I'm not seeing that yet. And the interesting thing about the Gates Foundation is it still has living donors, and they're very active, and they determine, for the most part, the strategy.
Yeah.
And that's a very much a personal choice of those two donors, and they're very individual in their approach. Now, I think they work with other foundations a
they do,
lot.
sure. Yep.
Yeah, of course. But I think that's one of the issues around the nonprofit sector is how individualized everything is. And that does actually make it hard to create large strategies. One of the things that we've done with the waterfront is deliberately try to coalesce a group of us around the project and to actually fundraise together, talk to people together, actually say, we're all about this together. Because if you don't do that, people naturally compete. That's just the way we're set up here. And I think it's problematic, and I've been a firm believer that I would love to see one of the foundations, maybe the community foundations, set up an M&A fund to get nonprofits to actually merge or to acquire each other, because I think we have way too many of them, and we're duplicating back offices, duplicating all kinds of infrastructure. And because of that waste in the system, I think we don't have great infrastructure that we might have if we actually were able to. But starting a nonprofit is such a individual thing, and we don't really have a way of driving maturity in those nonprofits through some other mechanism other than very large donors. I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Yep. And the only thing harder than getting nonprofits to work together is getting philanthropists and funders to
work together.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've got one more question out there from somebody.
I have a question.
Go.
Oh.
In your experience in lots of different nonprofits, I'm sure there's been times when it seemed wonderful, but once you got involved, it just didn't work.
Yes.
And I'm interested in knowing, for those of us that have less experience, when we're evaluating something, we're excited, we're enthusiastic, we look at the executive director, et cetera, in retrospect, what are the factors that have been most relevant and impactful for it to succeed?
Whether they listen to me and do what I say.
Humble philanthropy there. That's great.
No,
I think the last person in the world I would expect to hear that come out of.
It's an interesting question. I've had two fairly disastrous experiences. And, I actually recommend them to you. And the reason is that you actually learn more from those, because you can't win all the time. And it's always a little bit of a gamble, because first of all, you can't see into the future, and things can happen. So I was on a mental health board when King County cut all the mental health funding, and so, created this huge crisis. And so I think, and trying to adapt to that crisis was really problematic for the organization. So, but I actually think sometimes living through that life cycle, where you actually have to take it back down to zero and start over and think about how you're going to solve this problem in a different way, that's not a bad thing. And part of what you have to do is you have to ask yourself the honest question somewhere in the cycle and say, do I belong here? Am I providing value? And be honest and ask people. This is why having a good group of people to work with is really helpful, because usually if they're working well together, they can be honest with each other. And and also being honest, I actually think failing is, as we've discovered, is actually one of the most beneficial things we can do in life, at least once. And but you learn a lot. But it is also important to ask yourself at some point, am I adding value? Because I know that after I'm on a board for about 9 or 10 years, I get really grumpy. And I ask I ask myself the question, am I actually doing any good here? And so that's, and everybody's different. I'm not saying that's an absolute formula, but I think you need to learn to understand your own reactions to situations, and also find your replacement. That's the number one. If you're going to leave, you got to find somebody to replace you if you can. I mean, that's the only fair thing to do. So
when SVP started in 1997, I was lucky enough to go to the first event. A lot of people know Paul Brainerd was involved with it. Some people know Scott Oakey was involved. There were 3 other co-founders there that night sitting on stools talking about it. One of those people was Maggie Walker. And I can, honest to God, tell you in the 18 years I've done this work, I can count on one hand the people that are truly just massive, awesome role models for me. And you are one of them.
But I'm not massive. I'm
Okay.
really small.
Incredibly important, bigger than life, meaningful role models, and you are one of them. Thank you.